Colin Hennessy. Welcome to the Take a Closer Look podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be with you.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm really excited to dig into a bit about you and your career and tell the listeners a bit more about Colin that they might not have seen before or they might not get the gist of when they look at your LinkedIn profile. So I guess thinking about that, starting with a very nice, easy question. We won't dig too deep to start with. What's your current role? Tell us a bit about you and what you're doing right now.
Sure. I'm the Vice President for Alumni and Donor Engagement at the University of Iowa Center for Advancement. And what that means is I look after the engagement part of our two-pronged mission here at the UICA. We're an organization that's dedicated to advancing the University of Iowa through philanthropy and engagement. And I have the engagement part of that mission. So annual giving, Marcom, donor engagement, events, stewardship, and alumni engagement as well.
It's such a fascinating space. And I know obviously we chatted briefly before about kind of what it all entails. And I'm really excited to be able to share it all because it's so interesting. And actually as a Brit, and I know I shared this previously with you as well, that having gone through the UK university system, it's all quite different to me. And so we'll dig into why that is as we chat. But before we get into that, what we like to do on this podcast as well is understand a bit more about what people would say about you outside of your professional setting. So you've given us a really lovely overview of what you do for work. But if we were to ask your friends and family, how would they describe you?
Yeah, I've been thinking a little bit about that since we first chatted. And that's probably one of the hardest questions you're going to ask me, I think. I think people outside of work would say that I have a hard time slowing down, that a relaxing Saturday for me is checking off as many items on my to-do list as possible. To that, I also think people might mention that I really enjoy spending time with my family and friends. My husband and I have a delightful 4.5-year-old son, and he is our world. And we spend a lot of time doing things in support of his development, growth, happiness. I like to be outside a lot, and I enjoy cycling. And I say that, and then people might be like, oh, that's really cool, he's a cycler. And the reality is I am mildly addicted to my Peloton. So I spend as much time as possible as I can on that.
Counts.
So
that counts.
Yeah.
You're virtually doing all those trails. Right. And as a mum of a similar age child, I know that you spend all your time trying to do stuff that supports them and helps to develop them. And I know that when I come into work on a Monday and my colleagues say, well, what did you get up to at the weekend? It's basically a whole lot of parenting, a whole lot of different things that are aligned to parenting. I went to a party. No, a 5-year-old's party, not a party of a friend. So yeah, it all becomes all about the child at this sort of age. But I think it's really lovely, and it's great to hear, that you're really dedicating so much of your time to that as well. And what do you think? I mean, it's funny when we ask this question because lots of people kind of these days say that there's not actually much difference between them inside and outside of work. But would you agree with that? Do you think that the lines are sort of blurring?
Yeah, I think I bring as much as possible my kind of whole self to work, and that's not that different than the person I am at home. I may be at times a little bit more patient at work than I am at home, just because in the professional work environment, it's not good to lose your cool, so to speak. So there are certainly moments at home where I could probably be better with a little bit more patience, but I don't think I'm drastically different in and outside of the workplace.
So we've heard a little bit about what you're doing right now and the wonderful work that you're doing, but I'd love to know how you ended up there. What have you been doing throughout your career? I mean, I know that you have actually a fairly technical background, but what you're doing now might not seem like the most technical role. So what's that transition look like?
Yeah. So I started my career in what I would say a more IT environment. I have always been interested in how things work, and in particular, how kind of technology works and the intersection of kind of daily life and technology. I have been surrounded by tech for a long time. My dad spent 30 years at IBM. And so that kind of idea of tinkering or so forth, or the integration of technology into life, has been something kind of pervasive. I'm not overly technical. At one point, I'm really rusty now, could do a little bit of coding. But I think where my skill set really lied was in understanding some of those technical things and being able to make that transition and translate them for folks who are less technical. So I spent a fair amount of my time in IT as either an end user advocate or someone developing and leading training programs for large scale technology implementations. I thought
Mm.
that's where I would be. I thought my career would kind of take me through that. But there was a moment in which I found myself kind of at an inflection where I'm at an airport about to go to yet another client meeting, literally leaving my family kind of behind me in that moment, and just kind of had a moment of reflection. And so I did that engagement, came back, laid out a path to actually resign from my position at that tech firm and rethink what I wanted to do with my career. I was still really pretty early in my career. And the path was a little bit winding. When you have a lot of IT related things on your resume, it's hard to completely shift gears to something else.
Yeah.
I took a couple of more opportunities within that IT related space, but ultimately found myself at the University of Iowa in 2008. And that was really following a conversation, like a parking lot conversation, I would say, between myself and my twin sister. My twin has long spent her career in higher education. We happened to be having breakfast maybe on our birthday. We always tried to do that together. And she said, you'd be a great fundraiser for higher education. And like it kind of blew my mind because I didn't have any idea what she was talking about. I didn't really know that was a job. I didn't
Yeah.
know what that meant. But there was something that she had connected some dots for me, and that led to then testing the water in this field. And that was nearly 20 years ago now. Yeah, I joined the fundraising world in 2008 professionally, having spent about a decade doing it as a volunteer. And it was really
Yeah.
that I thought she saw, this kind of
Yeah.
natural, maybe extroversion, ability to talk with people, and this volunteer work that I had dedicated, a decade of my life to do that was related to
Mm.
fundraising. And she was kind of like, that's a job.
Yeah.
And the rest is history.
You can actually make a career out of that. And now look, she was right. I
Yeah,
bet
she
she's
was.
saying, yep, you
Yep.
can thank me. And so now you have worked with, and I know we joked about this last time we spoke, and I say it a lot when we speak to higher education professionals, that people who get into higher education just don't seem to ever want to leave, in the best way possible. People seem to love working in the industry. And you have now worked across several institutions. So I'm interested to hear how your different experiences within, because again, we know that one experience within one higher education institution can be very different from another. I'd love to hear some of the kind of lessons and stories that you've learned along the way through those different sizes and types of organizations that you've been in.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I joined the University of Iowa in 2008, and that was wonderful. It was a great experience for me working for my alma mater. I am a graduate of the University of Iowa. But then in 2009, unfortunately, my job was eliminated due to the financial crisis. And so I had this really kind of earth shaking moment where I was new to a career. I'd kind of taken a step differently, not necessarily down, but in a different path. Was really energized by it, was excited about it, was coming to work every day feeling that I was doing good for an institution that mattered so much to me. And then there was this arresting moment where my job was eliminated. And
Mm.
it was a turning point for me. And so I had that moment of reflection and mourning of what that meant for me, but then kind of figured out how I could move forward. And by moving forward, I basically made a list of the aspirational schools I wanted to go to. Having started my career in fundraising in the Big Ten, I thought to myself, where do I want to go next? What's
Yeah.
the next kind of pathway? And so being from the East Coast, I was like, I want to head back east, and I think I want to try an Ivy League school. And so I wrote a list of the 8 Ivies and started thinking about who do I know at any of these schools and who might have a job opening. And that's what led me to the University of Pennsylvania, which ended up being an incredibly important time in my life and career. But I'll tell you, those first couple of months were so challenging. That culture shift, I was already navigating this idea of leaving a technical kind of engineering styled environment, moving into
Mm.
higher ed, nonprofit, moved at a very different pace to then moving from a big public flagship state institution to a private Ivy institution. So many cultural changes in each of those spaces. And
Mm.
after I got over the first couple of bumps in the road, so to speak, it really opened up a tremendous time for me. So I spent 9 years at the University of Pennsylvania and really honed my skills and did some great things. Fantastic mentorship from someone who I continue to lean upon for that type of relationship, among other aspects. And then after that 9 years, went to the University of Chicago. So a similar kind of look and feel of an institution. If you look at their profile, they're both elite, they're both highly resourced, they're both big producers of what they do annually and fundraising. And yet their cultures felt very different. Not making a value statement saying one was better than the other. They were just different. And it was really a welcoming opportunity in my career to think about what matters most in an environment in which we work and how not everyone is suited for every environment, despite how similar they may appear. And I was thinking about that in terms of having had conversations with hundreds of parents over the years about their interest in their son or daughter attending, let's say Penn, right? And having those conversations saying, just because you went to Penn doesn't necessarily mean it's right for your child.
Might not be suited to them. Exactly. Yeah.
And that wasn't made more clearly to me until I left Penn and went to Chicago, and then very quickly realized that just because I was really right for Penn, I personally may not have been really right for the University of Chicago, despite the fact that I was well supported by people. I think I did some good work there. There were just aspects that didn't quite gel for me. And I think that's a parallel that people have kind of across their working time frame.
Yeah, and I think, like you say, on paper, it should have been a fairly linear shift, right, from one institution to the other. But like you say, that cultural aspect, and you're right, like it's not necessarily just in higher education, it's in every industry, but that cultural aspect is so important to whether or not that's the right place for you. And I think being aware of that when you're making these big changes as well is so important. I really loved your incredibly proactive approach to how you kind of turn things around having been laid off. And do you think that has, I mean, it definitely has had obviously an impact in the way that your career has, the trajectory you've taken since? Can you imagine what you might have done differently or what might have happened had you not have responded in that way? And I think it's really important to note as well that you left a role at Iowa and now you're back at Iowa. So I'd love to hear how you kind of feel about that. I mean, that says everything about an institution, that you can go through something that exactly, and as you said, can be really heartbreaking, to then be happy to go back there says a lot about them.
Yeah. I wish I could have recorded whatever my thinking was back in 2009, because I also think back on how I responded in that situation. I'm so grateful, and not to pat myself on the back, but I'm grateful that I responded in the way that I did, because to your point, I'm back, right? And if I had proverbial, burned the place down, so to speak, on my way, I was so angry or something like that, then this great job that I have today that would have still come to be, right, then I would probably be considered because of the way I left. And so I think deep inside, I held a lot of space for how important the University of Iowa was to me, and that I would be doing a disservice to the kind of sanctity of that relationship if I was just not the best person I could be. And I don't know if I shared this with you, but that week that I was packing up my banker's box and walking out the door, I made a planned gift to the University of Iowa. So my last, after having been let go, I made a gift that would qualify me for then their President's Club, their highest giving society.
Oh, wow.
Because I wanted to make sure that I didn't allow this moment of pain to erode the incredible gift that I was bestowed by attending this university.
It's amazing.
I have shared that with other people when they're talking about, career growth and all this other kind of stuff. Don't burn any bridges, literally. You never know when you might want to be coming back. And I think this is a really good example. I have always held on to some of the core elements of what this place is which is trying to be the best place you've ever worked. That's something that on
Yeah.
the leadership team we talk about all the time. And it's hard work. There's long hours some days, but if we can have all of the other pieces feel like this is still the best place, then that's worth it every day.
Yeah.
When this opportunity came up, I couldn't help but apply and hope
Yeah.
that it would work out.
It's so cool. Such a positive story. And yeah, I love hearing it. It says a lot about you in terms of the way that you build relationships, which is obviously such a huge part of your role. I'd love to hear how you do approach that relationship building, particularly in terms of what it is that you do. And for any of our listeners who aren't as aware of your role and how it works, your kind of secret sauce, if you don't mind giving it away, to building the strongest relationships and making it such a success.
I think some of the work that we do engaging donors and volunteers is transferable when you're thinking about it from a management perspective. And it's really trying to, and I've seen my thinking on this kind of elevate and shift as I move into different types of roles, but spending as much time listening and truly engaging with the other person versus listening to answer a question or just kind of pro forma going through things. So,
Mm.
at its most basic, I have one-on-ones with all of my direct reports, as I'm sure many managers do. And that time I share with my team members, that is their time. Like I may have one or two questions that if we don't naturally get to, I might ask, but
Yeah.
I want folks to come to me with what's on their mind so that we can engage in that. I also am trying very hard, especially in this role, to let my leaders lead. So I am passionate about annual giving and I'm passionate about alumni relations and donor engagement and Marcom, but I don't need to be the one at the table making the decisions. Some
Yeah.
like I have empowered really great leaders on our team to make those types of decisions. And a learning curve for me is to get out of the way and be there when needed, but to also just let people do their work. And that's
Yeah.
been really gratifying. I was again talking with a former colleague, and I find I spend my day doing things that are not the things I did 3 or 4 years ago. And
Yeah.
it's an interesting transition to be thinking
Yeah.
about things in a different way or to be learning more how to delegate certain things to people and ask for their insight. Like I love to be wrong. I love it when I have an
Yeah.
idea that I think is it and someone comes in and says, "But have you looked at it this way?" And I'm like, "Wow, thank
Yeah.
you. That is so helpful." So
It's
yeah,
such a sign of trust. You trust your team. As you say, you've hired great people. They are experts in what they do. You trust them to make decisions. And I think, yeah, just really going back to your point about really listening and understanding what people are saying. And I guess that must be reflected again in, and I know you're kind of saying that you're moving away from that sort of the day-to-day piece, I guess you might call it, but that must have been a big part of your success in being able to do that piece so well that you listen to people and you understand people. Has that translated into the way that you work with donors in particular?
yeah, I think so. I'm often asked by early career people, like, what is it like to make an ask, right? That first
Yeah.
time you sit in front of someone, you're about to ask them for whatever. It could be $100 or $1 million. It may still give you butterflies in your stomach. And the reality is that it should never be a surprise, right? You've built that relationship. You've listened over the years. You've gotten to know them. I want to also draw that bright line. Like, there are people with whom I am very friendly, but being really mindful of like, I'm here to do a job. And I hope that we are professional friends and so forth, but it's also making sure we're protecting the parts of our relationship so that we can both do our jobs. My job is
Yeah.
to make the ask, and the donor's job is to evaluate it and make their own decision. And I think we need to have that level of clarity of role so that it doesn't inadvertently get murky, right? Because I would never want someone to do like, well, I'm going to make this gift because I am going to disappoint Colin if I don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's for me and my mom and dad to talk about those
Yeah.
types of things, but that's
Yeah.
not the role of donor and kind of, fundraiser, so to speak. But I think it does really boil down to investing the time, and that can be over the course of one meeting, you can accomplish some of these things, or it's multiples, but to make sure that we are on the same page with what our roles are, and that I am trying to put your best interests into action by supplying you with an opportunity that meets your goals.
And in terms of actually understanding people and getting to know them, I'd imagine that's changed somewhat over the years as well. So I'd love to know how much technology and data is now playing a part in your role, and how you actually understand those potential donors even before you build those relationships. How has that changed over time, and what does that look like for you today?
Yeah. So I think that there's the standard go-tos that many of us do. If I'm about to meet you, I'll probably peek at your LinkedIn profile. Like I know you did that before we met, those types. So I'm going to do those types of things. There's also other databases that we can subscribe to that share information that's been aggregated. And I think there's a little element of like being a lawyer where you're trying to engage in conversation, but you're not going to necessarily ask a question you may not already know most of the answer to, or the answer to, right? Because you don't necessarily want to have that gotcha moment, right? Where you ask this and you're completely wrong. And of course that happens, but there's a natural way I sometimes find that I can leverage the background information that I've found to fuel the conversation that we're having. And my biggest kind of goal in doing this is how to leverage information that I've gained without being creepy, right? It's like that.
Yeah, that's a fine line.
Right? We talk about that a lot. How do we not have the creepy factor, right?
Yeah, we talk about that in terms of personalization a lot. How do you make it feel like they're sort of landing on your website, or receiving emails that they think, how do you even know that stuff about me? There is definitely a fine line.
Like we're spying on you or something like that. It's how do we humanize, I think, this data, right? Because there is a huge amount of data, regardless of whether I want it or not to be available, that people can find about me, right?
Yeah.
And depending on how that is kind of shared back to me in communication, can make me feel on edge or can make me feel like you know me. And it's like that really fine line. And I think in speech, when we're talking with one another, we have more opportunity to finesse that and kind of pivot in real time. I think it's really hard when we try to kind of put that data or those things that we know into written or digital communication, which are flat, kind of atonal. I think that can be hard. And yet that's in so many ways the agreed upon best practice, right? The more personalized we can make a communication, the better outcome. But it's also that very fine line of not wanting to be like, we're literally looking at you right now. It's hard. In fact, one of the tests that Dr. Milkman did earlier in her career looked at how to move populations of people to kind of the pro-social behavior of voting. And so she went through and was able to look at some data about voting and then put some direct mail interventions out in the market that in varying control groups described higher levels of knowledge of what someone's voting behavior was. I mean, it's public information, like it's accessible. But it's very interesting when you get a card that says, "Dear Colin, did you vote? Did you know that most of your neighbors voted?" Right? Like, that's interesting, right?
It's an extra layer of FOMO.
Exactly. With this idea of, well, if most of my neighbors voted, I should vote too, right? And so just thinking about those types of things, but not having the adverse effect, which is turning someone off.
Exactly. And are you finding that you're kind of connecting channels a bit more these days as well? Like, I don't know if it's, and not to put words in your mouth, I don't know if you kind of were previously a bit more of a sort of siloed department that wouldn't necessarily share data or use insights from other areas of the business, but just thinking in terms of sort of audience segmentation and how you're actually tracking the donors that you're speaking to in terms of what they're doing through other channels and how they're engaging with the institution in other ways. Are you seeing more of that?
Yeah, I think both here at Iowa, we're interested in that. And I think as an industry, we're seeing more and more of that.
Yeah.
Over the last, 15 plus years, the practice of annual giving has really shifted from this idea of let's send as many people as possible our invitation to give with the hope that as many of them as possible will reply, right? It's the kind of send out more because that will get us more. The reality is that we can send that same message to like 10,000 people instead of 100,000 people and get the same return
Yeah.
and decrease the number of opt-outs that we get. And so the world
Yeah.
has shifted so much so that we need to be far more thoughtful on that kind of cross-channel data influence so that we're not harming our ability to communicate with people long term. I think another example of this that we're really interested in, especially in my shop here, where our alumni engagement or our more traditional alumni relations team is integrated alongside our annual giving team, our marketing communications, and our donor engagement. We're all one big team. And so we're thinking a lot about how what we do in alumni engagement is influencing the outcomes in annual giving and vice versa. Who's going to an event and what's the next 4 steps after they go to an event that we want to put out there so that we can increase their engagement and their giving rather than having this siloed effect of you're only thinking about annual giving and you're only thinking about alumni engagement. We are actually embedded in our strategic plan, introducing projects that kind of force these cross-team collaborations for desired outcomes that are at the highest strategic level.
Yeah, and having a massive impact on the institution as a whole, I'd imagine. So yeah, it must be fascinating and really rewarding. And it's kind of more of that sort of like, to use marketing terms, I suppose more of the sort of ABM approach of actually looking at the people that you want to be really engaging with and making sure that at every touch point they're getting the best possible engagement, and that doesn't just sit with you guys, but it sits with the broader marketing team as well. So yeah, that's it's really cool to hear. I'm going to dig in a little bit more now into the real Colin, because as I said, we obviously love to hear about your career. We love to hear about the lessons that you've learned along the way, but we also love to hear about the real you. As we always say on this podcast, I said it at the beginning as well, that you can learn so much about someone from a LinkedIn profile and you can kind of really understand the career trajectory they've taken, but you don't always know about some of the stuff that might have happened before that might have actually influenced where they are now. So I love to always understand, is there anything that you think from your sort of personal life and your background that has influenced the direction you've taken career-wise? You mentioned your twin sister kind of pushing you into doing what you're doing today, encouraging you, I should say. But is there anything else that you can kind of look back and think, yeah, that probably did influence the way I've taken things career-wise?
Yeah. So in some way I was bound for a space in higher ed. My mom's family, for example, has a long tradition of spending time on a college campus. My great-grandmother was one of the first MD graduates of Boston University. My mother's father was a acclaimed economist and faculty member. My grandmother had a master's degree and was a published poet and was the first adult married woman to graduate from the college that she did. And then all of the women in my family most directly graduated from that same college. And then my mom worked there for 25 years. And so in early days, I remember spending time on that campus and not really knowing necessarily what it was, but knowing that college was a thing. And I previously mentioned my dad, and after 30 years at IBM, he took a turn and got his doctorate and went into higher ed as well and spent another 20 years split between 2 campuses leading efforts in higher education. So I feel like there was likely some,
you were destined.
The reality is that when my twin and I were graduating from high school, she knew that she was off to the same women's college that was the tradition. That was her path. And I honestly had no idea what I was going to do with my life as a high school senior, and yet had some relative success as a musician. I came to music pretty late in life, but I played what we might refer to as an endangered instrument in high school. I played the double bass, which required a big car, basically, right?
I remember the kids that had to carry them on their back. Yeah.
So being the middle child of 7, we drove big cars. And so I easily put a double bass in the car. And because not everyone played this instrument, it's not the cello or the violin that everyone kind of can play or is interested in learning to play. got relatively successful at an instrument that you could be not the best at and still get high marks, so to speak. And so I was like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to be a music person. And so I went off to the Bay Area to study music and got a pretty rude awakening that I was really actually not that great at it. And so,
Double bass wasn't going to get you as far as you thought.
I would say that maybe a career in the double bass meant I would be destined to eating, those 99-cent ramen noodles every night. But honestly, I'm not sure I can even afford that. So I quickly found reality. And that's when I left the Bay Area and transferred to the University of Iowa and was able to dabble and explore academically things that a big public institution allows you to do. I was a philosophy major for a minute. I was a marketing major for a little while. I had these ideas of going to law school, all this other kind of stuff. And then I found communication studies, and Iowa has a long and very proud history of its place in the communication, writing kind of story in American higher education. And it really, really fit for me. And so that early kind of, I will say, failure led to where I was here. And frankly, my first year here wasn't great. I was way too overextended. I thought I could do all the things all the time and be successful at it. And it just wasn't the case. So I had some real opportunities to figure out how to slow down and how to apply myself to the areas that were most interesting and would be the most fruitful, while also not losing sight of the long game. There was an opportunity, I think my junior or maybe early in my senior year, where I could have left my college career and gone to work in this IT kind of space that I was, that I had been dabbling in as a student. They said, it's fine, you don't have a degree, we're excited for you to come work with me and work with us. And it was really appealing, but then very limiting long-term if I hadn't finished. So it's like saying no to some of those really good opportunities so you can hold fast to hopefully see what the best opportunities in the future would be.
I mean, it's a great story, and I think the IT background as well, particularly thinking about the way things are moving now, I feel like that must have helped along the way as well, like being at least aware of some of the kind of technical happening in the background of everything, so that you can almost advise and coach people in how to manage those while kind of doing maybe the softer side of the work as well. Do you think that's been the case? Have you seen how, your kind of tech know-how has sort of helped you through your career?
I think so. So in two cases. So a lot of what I was doing professionally was taking, in this case, hardware. So hardware products that had been developed for direct store delivery. And the best example I can give is the delivery personnel who put Pepperidge Farm products in stores. They all walk around with a digital device that's got their inventory and all that on it. And one of the roles that I had was actually figure out how to take those devices apart at their most modular or basic level, and then go around the world and train people how to repair them, so that if you were PepsiCo of the United Kingdom or something like that, you could buy one of our devices, have it repaired locally, and that would essentially be better than import export to have it repaired, right? And while I didn't fully have the background to understand the chips at their most basic level on the board, I knew enough to figure out when something wasn't working and how to train people in a variety of languages. Like I did one of these in the United Arab Emirates that had guests from Saudi Arabia and other parts of the Middle East. I did it in China, where I had an interpreter repeating every word I said in Mandarin.
Wow.
But like getting to the most basic level so that we could talk about taking the screen out and putting a new screen in, and the keyboard and all those types of things. So understanding things at those levels so that they could be discussed kind of in the broadest terms, I think has helped me. And then on the technical side, having spent a little bit of time doing some coding, and some of my favorite coding is I used to lead a coding for kids class in the summer at the local community college. And it's very humbling to be in a room of younger learners who at times pick up the
I was going
content.
to say, pick it up instantly.
Nope.
Like, yeah, yeah,
And a lesson plan you had for an entire week, they're done in an hour, right? And then you have the other, where they're also full of energy and running around the room. So, but understanding those level of things, so that if in conversation where someone, there was a particular situation where at a prior school where we were talking about the integration of a new product, and there was going to be a distributed level of work to staff who previously would never have done that type of work. And there was a fair amount of language like, oh, all they have to do is, or it's just like this. And I think having come from a background to understand what that meant was useful to try to also then articulate where some of the barriers would be for someone whose role has never included anything like that. We never hired them to be thinking about those types of things. And it doesn't mean that they're deficient at their job. It just means we're asking them to do things that are way outside scope. And so I think that has been helpful. I think also it's helpful to be able to push back a little bit when someone says that can't be done. I have a hard time with that can't be done. And not because I know all the answers, but I also feel like, what if we thought about this or that, or, and I find that sometimes that's useful, particularly if we are finding ourselves in an impasse where one group is saying can't be done to a group that presumably doesn't have the depth of experience to ask in a different way. And that's certainly not all the case. And it's an increasingly less common space that I find myself in. But there have been situations where I've been able to ask some of those questions just because I may have had similar experiences in other environments.
yeah. I think, and a point you made just before about people having to do things in their roles that it's not necessarily that they can't do it, but it's completely different from what they've thought about before. I think that has never been truer than right now,
Yeah.
where everyone's bringing in AI to add efficiency to everything, which, you don't, they're built in such a way that you don't need to have a technical know how to be able to use them, but it certainly helps to be able to understand what the AI is doing, what it's pulling from. If you're using some sort of interface that's delivering answers to an end user, for example, where's the content coming from that they're getting those answers from? Your expertise in being a comms and marketing person lies there. You need to make sure that that stuff is ready to be able to deliver whatever it is that the AI tool is going to be pulling from. So I think that's a really specific example, but that's what it got me thinking about. Yeah, we are asking people to deal with these tools and use these tools that they didn't necessarily even have any thought about when they got into this career. I
Right.
certainly didn't. So yeah, having this sort of extra, more technical side of things that you do need to understand to an extent to know that you're using it ethically and effectively is a big challenge for people. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. Being able to bring that back and say, actually, we need to understand that people are trying to juggle something that's completely separate from what they're used to. So just to take a slight sidestep, I know also that you've worked obviously with lots of institutions across lots of different regions and countries. And I'm interested in the kind of perspectives that you've gained from that, particularly as I mentioned at the beginning, I alluded to the fact that I'm a Brit. And so the donor thing, while it exists, is not as prevalent in the UK. And yeah, so just interested to hear the experiences you've had around that kind of thing with the cultural differences.
Sure. So at the University of Iowa, we have a relatively low percentage of our alumni who live abroad and international. It's about 3%. And so it's not a huge part of our portfolio here. Whereas when I was at the two previous institutions, we had a much higher number of individuals who either were from outside the US or lived outside the US. And an example that I'll offer is that when I spent time at Penn, I also got to spend time traveling to the UK with a relatively high degree on an annual basis, engaging our alumni who were either British nationals or expats. And it was fascinating to learn about the culture of philanthropy outside of the United States, and yet think about how to translate what we needed as an American university into terms or into message content and so forth that would resonate with those who are now living in another culture. And, what I would find is that even with our most recent graduates, they were pretty quick to adopt that kind of cultural sentiment or those cultural
Yeah.
norms
Yeah.
of where they have landed, particularly, we would have a relatively high degree of recent grads who might go off and work in investment banking or so forth in London and would very quickly, despite the fact that they may have been, I don't know, from Kansas, suddenly have adopted that kind of British mentality about giving and so forth. And it was such a great opportunity to learn about the fact that philanthropy isn't universally understood and that it really in so many ways boils down to how are we communicating what I like to refer to as being worthy of someone's philanthropic support and less about coming across as needy. So we shy away from, and this has borne out also, I spent some time consulting and worked with some international clients and so forth. And this bears fruit in those conversations as well. And that each of our organizations are worthy, right? But when we start saying things like, if you don't give us $25, we're going to have to turn the lights off, that's that kind of neediness vibe that increasingly I find today's sophisticated donors can see through. They appreciate more the complexity of how an institution is funded to understand that likely their $25 isn't really going to turn the lights off or lock or on. But when we translate that into the impact that that donor can make on the institution or by virtue of the institution, the world community that they're interested in supporting, that seems to be a truism kind of globally to some degree. So we talk a lot about making change through the University of Iowa versus this idea that someone's kind of giving to, I mean, they are giving to the University of Iowa, but what we want to talk about is that translational effect of a gift to us helps fuel this research or fuel this change. So it's this, we are the vehicle through which you are making a change in the world.
A really tangible impact. And I can imagine at this moment in time in particular, that's increasingly important from both in terms of being increasingly important for higher education institutions to be able to raise the money that you need, but also to be able to really delicately and impactfully sort of handle those conversations with donors when economically things aren't as certain as we would like. So having those conversations must be both increasingly important, but also increasingly challenging, I can imagine.
Yes. And I think it's on our shoulders to continue to demonstrate the positive impact. Donors want to give at any level. They want to give knowing that it is making an impact. And if we are unable to showcase that, then that's a failure on our part.
I have one more question for you, and then I will let you go. We always like to end on the same question that we've obviously heard so much about you and your career and all the different roles that you've done. And if there was someone out there thinking, I really love where Colin is now, or I love some of the experiences he's had along the way, I'd love to do something similar, what would your advice be for them?
To be curious and to find those people in their networks on LinkedIn, wherever they may be, who are doing the things that they want to be doing, and try to spend time with them. Ask them for advice. Ask them for a 30-minute virtual coffee. Ask them about the kind of direction that they took that they wish they hadn't taken. And I think, the curious part is when I'm thinking about hiring someone or when I'm interviewing someone, or I am being interviewed rather, I am trying to articulate that I have a certain skill set, right? I'm coming to the table with something, but I'm also coming to the table with curiosity, that I am going to thoughtfully ask, why are we doing these things? Can we be doing them better? Do we need to be doing them anymore? So that we can continue to be great or be even greater. Someone shared that some of the things they look at most when hiring is someone who's hungry and humble and curious. And that's kind of held in my brain, right? I don't want the person to walk in the room, or I don't want to be seen as the person who walks in the room and says, I know it all. I've done it all before. You're never going to teach me anything new. Like, I don't want that to be me. And I want my colleagues to keep me honest or keep me accountable if I start coming across that way. I always want to be learning something new from those around me.
And I think, look, just based on this small 1 hour discussion that we've had, I think it's very clear to me that, yeah, the proactivity and the curiosity, as you say, that you've demonstrated throughout your career has definitely had a huge impact. So making sure that you are listing the institutions that you aspire to work for and making those connections for people that you are really inspired by, I think, yeah, that says it all. And I think people will learn a lot and be inspired by the decisions that you've made and the path that you've taken. So thank you so much for joining me and telling us all about it.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to spend time with you today.
It's been wonderful to meet you. Thank you, Colin. Take care.
You too.